I'm Rachel with Acterra, a San Francisco Bay Area nonprofit that works to create local solutions for a healthy planet. And I'm here today with Dan Hafman, a master composter, here to learn about composting.
Hello, everybody.
So Dan, why is composting important?
Well, one of the reasons we're standing out here, this is my garden. It lives on compost. We have wonderful soils here in the Bay Area but they're clay soils. They have all the nutrients you need to grow stuff except nitrogen. But what they are all suffering from due to human activity in the past is very low carbon. Most of the carbon that was in this soil before it was disturbed has gone to the atmosphere. Composting is a technique to put carbon-rich materials back into the soil. Vermicomposting is composting in a box. There is no contact with the earth, and we grow worms in this box to eat our food scraps. Here, we've got bacteria and fungi. It's essential to the action, but now we have an animal going through this stuff called composting worms. The good news about vermicomposting, any size box works. Put it on top of a couple of blocks, put a few holes in the bottom so it can have drainage, and that's about all there is structurally to a compost bin. Here's a couple other compost bins. That one over there, don't use it anymore, but that's an old ballot box from the 80s when people dropped their ballots off. County of Santa Clara, and they turned a bunch of them into compost bins. And then here's my workhorse. This is my bin for making vermicompost for the garden. And vermicompost is, verma means worm, and vermicompost is worm processed compost. Here we've got food scraps, paper, old newspapers, waste paper of any kind, not glossy paper, but regular paper. But if you got some leaves, leaves are wonderful for vermicomposting, so I have a few leaves here because I use them. And then the worms. And water, of course. Water is a part of every operation. If you know somebody who's doing vermicomposting, they can supply you with some worms. Because you can take up to, say, 25% of the worms out of your bin, and within a month or so, they're fully populated again. If you don't have a friend who has a worm bin, they are available for sale. You find them on Amazon. But if you go out there and buy compost worms on the internet, they'll give you other places other than just Amazon where you can order them. These are, by the way, called litter worms. A litter worm is a worm that lives in their food. They don't go into the soil hardly at all, if at all.
If you have a worm box in your apartment or in a small space, how might you prevent flies or other bugs from coming around?
If you don't want a rodent trying to lift the lid off, just put a weight on it. And so I'm going to pull the lid off. And now we're going to look in here. Notice just dry material on top. And that's the number one thing you can do to keep flies from being in your bin. Okay, so I'm going to open it up here in the middle, and we'll see some worms too, hopefully. Okay, notice I've taken all these dry leaves because I have lots of leaves. This could also be hand shredded paper. And now I'm digging into the material, and lo and behold, worms. See those little guys? And there's bugs too. There's all kinds of things in here. And they're sitting right up here in this top layers. Now, as you dig down further, that gets into their bedding area. And that is where you start out with wet paper. Lots of wet shredded paper, and I can show you an example in that other little box. And if you go way to the bottom, that's where you find the worm casts.
What are worm castings?
Worm castings is what we call the compost that results from this process. It is primarily worm poop. that has been further digested by bacteria.
And how do you harvest the worm castings?
You dig down and take them out. By the way, here's what they look like. Here's an example. No worms in here. The hardest part is taking them out without the worms.
And how often can you add food scraps or need to add other paper into your worm bin?
You can do it on a daily basis, but I don't recommend it. I recommend a once a week process. If I were starting this bin, I have some hand-torn paper. Just, yeah, you grab the whole thing. Yeah. See that? Yeah, she's really productive. And then, when you're done, rip it half one way this way, put it in the water, and you're good to go. Now pull them out and put them in there and just kind of tear them a little bit as you go. We say no dairy or meat scraps, primarily because they smell when they break down, and we don't want to attract rodents. But eggshells are wonderful. It's a good source of calcium. All you have to do is squeeze them in your hand. Some people put them in a blender, but you squeeze them in your hand and then distribute them at the food layer. Just like that. Throw this old squish in there. That's a piece of food. Here's an old potato. A piece of food. Oh, here's another banana peel. Let's assume the worms are in there now. We've already put worms in. They would be put in right at the food layer. Then I like to take a fold like this, one fold, and then we just lay it on top of the food. Do you want to do another one yourself?
Sure. So I do ripped up paper first, and then worms, and then food, and then unripped paper.
Yeah, just lay it on top like that. Then on top of that, that's when you add the dry stuff. For me, I have leaves, so I put a bunch of leaves on top.
All right, Dan, so how do we get started with the backyard composting?
The first thing, let's take a quick look at these materials. I have some green materials. They're called greens. They're actually nitrogen rich. Now we get to the browns. Browns are materials that have died naturally and are now loaded with carbon. Then once these materials are all chopped up, you'll have a green pile of chopped material, brown pile of chopped material. These are greens and browns all mixed up. This is ready to go into a pile. I actually chopped them up last night. Then when you stock it in the bin, you add water. Just once in a while, tear it down, then rebuild it. We call that turning the pile. So right here, this compost isn't quite done, but it's a lot further along. There's no color anymore. The color's all gone. And I'm going to step down here and get some new material that I just started a week ago. Notice this, there's still a lot of color left to it. And as opposed to that finished compost. And look at all the shapes that are still there. This has been chopped, but it's not pulverized. That looked like this about 2 months ago. This is finished compost. It's even a little finer than that. You can tell the particles are smaller. It's a little finer. I can tell. but this is another 3 to 4 weeks older than this stuff here is.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dan, and I'm hoping that our viewers can start their own compost bin soon.